My name is Ella. I'm 38 years old. And 10 years ago, on a Tuesday night in November, my parents changed the locks on the house I grew up in, with my things still inside. No warning. No conversation. Just a note taped to the door that said, "You need to figure out your own life. Don't call." I was 28. I had $47 in my account, one duffel bag worth of clothes from the doorstep, and nowhere to go. It was raining. I stood on that porch for a long time. I didn't cry. I was too stunned to cry. I just kept thinking, this is my family. This is my home. What I didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly imagined, was that 10 years later I would be sitting inside a house I own, reading a text message from my mother asking if she and my father could come stay with me. Permanently. Before I tell you what I said back, please take a second to like and subscribe if this story hits you, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. But before I take you back to the beginning, before I show you exactly how a family decides one of their children is disposable, I need to pause here for just a moment. Because I know some of you aren't just watching this as a story. Some of you are sitting with something tight in your chest right now. A recognition. That particular ache that comes not from hearing something foreign, but from hearing something familiar. Something you've never said out loud but have felt in your bones for years. Maybe it's the image of a door that wouldn't open. Maybe it's a different door. A conversation that ended too quickly, a holiday where you felt like a guest in your own family. A moment where someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally handed you a list of conditions instead. Maybe it's the memory of a phone that rang and rang and rang and the person on the other end simply chose not to pick up. If any of that landed, this story is for you. I'm not telling this for sympathy. I want to be clear about that. I am 38 years old. I have done the work. I have sat in the offices of good therapists and had the hard conversations with myself and built something real from the rubble of what that night left me with. I'm not standing in the rain on that porch anymore. But I remember her. I remember that version of me very clearly. And I think she deserves to have her story told, not to punish anyone, not to perform pain for an audience, but because somewhere out there is a 28-year-old sitting in a gas station parking lot at midnight with $47 and a duffel bag that smells like lavender, trying to figure out if they're going to be okay. And I want her to know that she is. So if this story is reaching you at a moment when you need it, please take a second right now before we go any further and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. It costs you nothing and it tells the algorithm that stories like this one, real ones, honest ones, the ones that don't have a tidy bow on them until the very end, are worth putting in front of people who need them. And leave me a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely want to know. There is something remarkable to me about the fact that this story, which started on a rain-soaked porch in a suburb that most people have never heard of, might be reaching someone in Lagos right now, or London, or a living room in the Philippines at 2 in the morning. If that's you, say hello. You are not alone in this. No. Let me take you back. To understand what happened on that November porch. To understand why two parents could look at a daughter and decide she was a problem to be discarded rather than a person to be loved. You have to understand the family I came from. Not the version they presented to the world. The real one. Because every family has two versions. The one for company and the one that lives behind the closed doors. The Dixon family, my family, the Mercer family, had perfected the gap between those two versions over decades. My parents are Gerald and Constance Mercer. My father, Gerald, spent 30 years as a mid-level operations manager at a manufacturing company in the kind of mid-sized Midwestern city where everyone knows your name at church but not necessarily at work. He is a tall man with a firm handshake and a loud laugh that fills whatever room he's in. Strangers love him immediately. He has a gift for making people feel seen. People who are not his family, that is. At home, Gerald Mercer operated on a different frequency. Quiet. Distant. Deeply conflict-averse in a way that meant he never started arguments, but he never stopped them either. He simply wasn't there. Physically present, emotionally somewhere else entirely. I spent most of my childhood trying to earn the version of my father that other people seem to get so easily. My mother, Constance, is a different kind of force entirely. If Gerald was an absence, Constance was a presence that filled every room, every conversation, every decision. She is a small woman, 5'2", precisely put together, the kind of person whose lipstick is always exactly right, and she runs things. She ran our household the way a general runs a campaign, with total strategic clarity about objectives, resources, and acceptable losses. She volunteered at the school, chaired committees at church, organized the neighborhood association's annual picnic for 15 consecutive years. To the outside world, Constance Mercer was the backbone of the community. Warm, capable, tireless. Inside our house, she was the person who decided what things meant. And what things meant depended almost entirely on which child was involved. Because I need to tell you about my brother, Nathan. Nathan Mercer is 3 years older than me. He is, by every metric our parents cared about, the success story. He went to the right college on a partial athletic scholarship. He married the right woman, Karen, a dental hygienist with a warm smile and absolutely no capacity for confrontation, which meant she fits seamlessly into our family's ecosystem. He bought a house 4 miles from my parents. He had 2 children, boys, which pleased my father in a way he never said out loud but never had to. He calls our mother every Sunday. He shows up to things on time and leaves when he's supposed to and never, ever makes anything complicated. Nathan is not a bad person. I want to be careful to say that clearly. He is not cruel. He is not malicious. He is something almost harder to reckon with. He is deeply, profoundly incurious about anything that might disturb the surface of things. Nathan sees the family the way my parents present it and has never once, to my knowledge, looked underneath. That made him perfect. And it made me, by contrast, a problem. I was the younger one. The girl. The one who asked too many questions and felt things too visibly, and once, at age 9, cried at a family dinner because my father made an offhand comment about a stray dog we'd seen on the road, and he'd said it probably didn't make it, with the casual cruelty of someone who'd already moved on, and I couldn't move on, and my mother told me to go wash my face because I was upsetting everyone. I learned early that emotions were a liability in the Mercer household. Or rather, certain emotions were. Nathan's frustration was always valid. My father's mood set the temperature of every room. My mother's feelings were the organizing principle around which all family life revolved. But mine, my sadness, my confusion, my need for explanation or reassurance, those were inconvenient. Dramatic. Too much. You're so sensitive, Ella. I heard that sentence so many times growing up that it stopped sounding like a criticism and started sounding like my name. I became fluent in smallness, in taking up less space, in reading rooms and adjusting accordingly, in being helpful, endlessly, reflexively helpful, because helpfulness was the currency I'd found that my family would actually accept from me. I couldn't make my father pay attention the way Nathan's baseball games did. I couldn't be the kind of daughter my mother wanted to show off. But I could be useful. I could do things. I could make things easier, smoother, lighter for everyone else. And so I did. For years I did. I helped my mother organize everything. Holidays, events, the logistical machinery of a family that ran on appearances. I helped Nathan move twice. I drove my father to a medical appointment the year his back was bad and he couldn't sit in a car for more than 20 minutes without pain. And I drove him in silence because he didn't want to talk and I didn't push. And afterward he said thanks in the distracted way you thank someone who's held a door open for you. I watched my parents buy Nathan and Karen a new refrigerator the year they moved into their house. A substantial stainless steel appliance delivered and installed as a housewarming gift. When I moved into my first apartment at 23, my mother gave me a set of towels. I told myself these things were small. I told myself I was being petty for noticing. I internalized the Mercer family's operating logic so completely that I was doing their work for them, convincing myself that the uneven treatment was somehow fair, or at least explainable. That I was reading too much into it. That I was, predictably, inevitably, being too sensitive. But the truth has a way of accumulating. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a single clarifying moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It builds. Quietly, steadily, one small moment at a time until one day the weight of it is undeniable. Until you are standing in a kitchen doing dishes that aren't yours at a celebration you organized for parents who just told 30 guests that you don't matter. And something inside you shifts in a way that cannot be unshifted. That shift had been coming for years before the night of the locked door. But I didn't know it yet. What I knew, what I had always known, the way you know the things you've taught yourself not to think about directly, was that I was not Nathan. I was not the plan. I was the other one. The helpful one. The one whose value was entirely conditional on her usefulness, and who had never once tested what would happen if she stopped being useful. I was about to find out. There are two things you need to know about the 18 months before my parents changed the locks. Two things that, looking back, made that night inevitable. The first is that I had started, quietly and carefully and with tremendous private terror, to build something of my own. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand declaration of independence. It was just a graphic design course I'd found online. One of those certificate programs you can do in the evenings, because I had always been good with visuals, always been the one who made the posters for school events and designed the programs for my mother's church fundraisers, and a colleague at the administrative job I was working had mentioned offhandedly that I had a real eye for this stuff, and something about hearing that from someone who had absolutely no reason to flatter me had lodged itself somewhere deep and refused to leave. I didn't tell my family. I did the coursework at my kitchen table after work 2 or 3 evenings a week, with a cup of tea and a kind of quiet, fierce concentration that felt entirely my own. It was the first thing in my adult life that belonged only to me. I started taking on small freelance projects. A logo for a local bakery. A social media template set for a woman who ran a small natural skincare business out of her home. The money was modest, laughably modest at first, but it was mine in a way that my regular paycheck never quite felt. And more than the money, there was this sensation I hadn't experienced in a very long time. The sensation of being good at something that no one had asked me to be good at. That's the first thing. The second thing is harder to talk about. 18 months before the locked door, I had a conversation with my mother that I have turned over in my mind 1,000 times since. We were in her kitchen. We were always in her kitchen, it seems, when the important things happened, and I had made some small comment about feeling overlooked at a recent family gathering. I don't even remember the specific incident now. Something minor. A decision that had been made without consulting me. A plan that assumed my availability without asking. I had said gently, carefully, using the conflict-avoidant language I'd spent years perfecting, I just sometimes feel like my time isn't valued the same way. My mother had looked at me for a long moment. And then she said, Ella, the problem with you is that you've always wanted credit for just being a decent person. That's not how it works. You do things for family because they're family. Not for recognition. He went back to whatever she was doing. The conversation was over. I stood there and nodded and said nothing because that is what I had been trained to do. But something happened in that moment that I didn't recognize at the time for what it was. A door closed. Not the kind with a lock and a note taped to it. Something quieter. Something internal. I stopped expecting anything. And when you stop expecting anything from people, something interesting happens. You start to see them very clearly. I saw my family clearly in those final 18 months, in a way I hadn't let myself before. I watched the patterns with new eyes. The way decisions were made. The way credit was distributed. The way my mother spoke about Nathan and Karen's life with pride, and about mine with a particular brand of faint, managing concern that was somehow worse than criticism. The way my father still didn't ask questions about my work or my life or what I wanted, the way he never had, the way I had spent 3 decades waiting for him to start. I wasn't angry. I want to be precise about this because anger is clean and what I felt wasn't clean. It was something more like grief. A long, slow, quiet grief for a version of my family that I finally understood had never actually existed. And then November came. And my key stopped working. And there was a note in my mother's handwriting that used 9 words to say something she'd been saying my entire life without ever quite saying it out loud. You are not ours. Not really. Not in the way that counts. I drove to that gas station. I sat under those lights. I had $47 and a lavender-scented duffel bag and 30 years of being the helpful one, the quiet one, the too sensitive one. And I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a revenge plot or a grand gesture or anything that looked from the outside like much of anything at all. I simply decided that I was done shrinking. I didn't know yet what that would look like. I didn't know what I was building toward. I couldn't have imagined sitting in that car in the rain what the next 10 years would bring. But I knew one thing with a certainty I had never felt about anything in my life before. I was never going back. Now I need to take you further back. Not to that gas station. Not to the locked door. Further. To the place where the pattern was first laid down, the way you lay a foundation before you build anything on top of it. Because what happened on that November night didn't begin in November. It began in the small, ordinary, unremarkable moments of a childhood that looked from the outside completely fine. And that's the thing about this kind of family dynamic that makes it so hard to talk about, so hard to even recognize when you're inside it. There's no single smoking gun. No one dramatic incident you can point to and say, there. That's where it started. That's the thing that broke everything. It's never one thing. It's 1,000 things. Each one small enough to dismiss on its own. Each one carrying just enough plausible deniability that the child absorbing them learns, over time, to doubt her own perception. To wonder if she's imagining it. To conclude, because children need to conclude this because the alternative is too frightening, that the problem must be her. Let me show you what I mean. I am 7 years old. It is Christmas morning. Nathan is 10. We come downstairs in our pajamas and the living room is arranged the way it always is. Tree in the corner presents underneath my mother's ceramic nativity scene on the mantel that we are not allowed to touch. Nathan's pile of presents is on the left side of the tree. Mine is on the right. Even at 7 I can see that his pile is larger. I tell myself this is because he is older. This is reasonable. I accept it. What I cannot accept, what I tuck away in the small, wordless filing system that children build for things they don't have language for yet, is the moment after all the presents are opened. Nathan has received the video game console he asked for. The one he'd been talking about for months. My father is on the floor with him, reading the setup instructions, already absorbed, already lit up with the particular attention he reserves for things Nathan cares about. I have received a beautiful doll. She has long auburn hair and a powder blue dress and she is objectively lovely. I hold her up to show my father. He glances over. Nice, Ellabelle. And goes back to the instruction manual. I sat with that doll for the rest of Christmas morning. I told myself it was fine. I was 7. I didn't have the words. But I filed it. I am 11 years old. Nathan has made the travel baseball team. It is a significant achievement. The team is competitive, the tryout process was rigorous, and my father is visibly, vocally proud in a way I have rarely seen him. He calls his brother to tell him. He buys Nathan new cleats that same afternoon. That summer, our family schedules are reorganized entirely around Nathan's game calendar. We drive to tournaments on weekends. My mother packs elaborate coolers. My father keeps a notebook where he tracks Nathan's batting statistics. That same summer I am cast as the lead in my school's end-of-year play. It is a small production, a 40-minute performance in the school gymnasium, parents invited. I practice my lines every night for 6 weeks. I learn to project my voice. My drama teacher, Mrs. Okafor, tells me I have a natural instinct for this and that I should keep pursuing it. On the evening of the performance, there is a baseball tournament. A big one, my mother explains. A really important one. My father says he'll try to make the second half of my play if the drive back isn't too long. He doesn't make it. My mother attends, but she spends most of the performance on her phone, monitoring game updates that my father is texting her. After she tells me I did wonderfully. She says it in the same tone she uses to compliment someone's casserole at a church potluck. I file it. I am 16 years old. Nathan has graduated high school and is heading to college in the fall on his partial scholarship. The family throws him a graduation party. A real one, catered in the backyard with a banner that reads "Congratulations Nathan" in blue and gold, his school colors. Relatives drive in from 3 states. My grandfather, who does not travel easily, makes the trip. There are speeches. My father gives a toast that makes several people tear up. My uncle films it on a camcorder. I watch from the edge of the yard, eating a piece of sheet cake, genuinely happy for my brother, and simultaneously aware of a thought I am ashamed to be having. What will my graduation look like? I tell myself, it will be the same. Of course it will. I'm being ridiculous. 4 years later I graduate high school. My parents take me to dinner at a nice restaurant, just the 4 of us. My mother gives me a card with $50 in it. My father orders steak and tells me he's proud of me and that I need to start thinking practically about my future. There is no party. There is no banner. My grandfather does not make the trip. I tell myself this is fine. Nathan's graduation was a bigger deal because he had the scholarship. Because there was more to celebrate. As I'm being, inevitably always, too sensitive. I file it anyway. This is what the toxic baseline looks like from the inside. It's not beatings. It's not screaming. It's not the kind of abuse that announces itself clearly enough to be named and addressed. It is the slow, grinding accumulation of 1,000 moments in which one child is shown, again and again, that she occupies a different category. That her achievements are acknowledged but not celebrated. That her needs are managed but not prioritized. That her presence in the family is valued primarily in terms of what she contributes. Her labor, her compliance, her willingness to smooth things over and take up less space, rather than who she simply is. I have talked to enough people in enough late-night conversations and therapy sessions and comment threads and quiet moments of honest recognition, to know that this experience has a shape. It is recognizable. It has a name in psychological literature. The scapegoat child, the identified patient, the one onto whom the family projects its anxieties and redirects its tensions. I didn't have that language growing up. I just had the feeling. The feeling of being slightly outside the warmth. Close enough to see it. Far enough to always feel the cold. By the time I reached my early 20s, the dynamic had calcified into something so normalized I'd stopped seeing it as a dynamic at all. It was simply reality. The water I swam in. Nathan and Karen announced their engagement at a family dinner. My parents were effusive. My mother cried happy tears. My father ordered a bottle of wine to celebrate. We toasted the couple while Karen showed everyone her ring under the dining room light. 2 years later, I mentioned to my mother that I've been seeing someone. A man named Thomas. A soft-spoken civil engineer who reads history books for fun and makes very good pasta and treats me with a careful, consistent kindness that I am, frankly, not entirely sure I know how to receive. My mother's response: "Is it serious? Just be careful, Ella. You can be a lot to handle sometimes." A lot to handle. I thought about Thomas for a long time after that conversation. I thought about whether she was right. Whether I was too much. Whether my needs, my feelings, my particular texture as a human being, were inherently burdensome to anyone who got close enough to feel them. Thomas and I dated for 14 months. He was good to me. He was patient and present in all the ways my family had never been, and I think that's precisely why I didn't know what to do with him. I had no framework for being loved without conditions. No muscle memory for receiving care without immediately trying to earn it, justify it, make myself smaller so it wouldn't run out. We ended quietly without drama. He told me gently that he felt like there was a wall he couldn't get past. He wasn't wrong. I just didn't know yet that I was the one who'd built it or why. I filed that too. The years between 22 and 28 blur together in my memory in the way that years do when you are living a life that is functional but not fully inhabited. I worked administrative jobs that paid adequately and asked nothing of me creatively. I had a small apartment 20 minutes from my parents' house that I showed up to family obligations reliably and on time. I helped with things, always helping with things, because that was my role and I had accepted my role and acceptance had become indistinguishable from peace. Except it wasn't peace. I understand that now. It was numbness. There is a difference and it took me a long time to learn it. Peace is quiet because things are settled. Numbness is quiet because you've stopped letting yourself feel the unsettled things. I was numb for most of my 20s. I moved through my life efficiently, helpfully, unremarkably, and I told myself this was fine because nothing dramatic was happening. Nothing was wrong in any way I could point to. I had a roof over my head. I had a family that, whatever its flaws, had not abandoned me. Until of course they did. Looking back now, I can identify the precise moment the numbness began to crack. It was not the locked door. It was not even my mother's comment about being a lot to handle. It was something smaller and quieter and in some ways more devastating than either of those things. It was a Sunday afternoon about 3 years before the November night. I was at my parents' house for a regular family dinner. The kind that happened most Sundays, that I attended most Sundays, that I had been attending most Sundays for years. Nathan and Karen were there with their boys. My mother had cooked. I had arrived early to help as I always did. After dinner my mother brought out a photo album. An old one from the 80s and early 90s. She spread it open on the coffee table and the family gathered around. My father, Nathan, Karen, the boys. Everyone leaning in, laughing at old haircuts and fashion choices, pointing at familiar faces. I leaned in too. And I noticed something. The album covered roughly 15 years of family life. It was thick with photographs, holidays and birthdays and vacations and ordinary Sundays. It documented, in careful chronological order, the life of the Mercer family. Nathan was in almost every photo. I was in perhaps a third of them. Not absent. Not entirely erased. Just present less. Captured less. Remembered less. As if even the act of reaching for the camera had happened more often than not when I wasn't quite in the frame. Nobody else seemed to notice. I didn't say anything. But I excused myself to the bathroom and I sat on the edge of my parents' bathtub, and I looked at the pale yellow tiles on the wall, and for the first time in years I let myself think the thought I had been filing away since I was 7 years old. They love me less. Not differently. Not in a different language or a different style or with different expectations. Less. Quantifiably, documentably, photographically less. And the thing about finally thinking a thought you've been refusing to think for 30 years is that once it's thought, it cannot be unthought. The foundation had cracked. Everything that came after. The locked door, the duffel bag, the note in 9 words, the gas station in the rain, was just the building finally coming down. There is a moment in every story like mine, and I know it's every story like mine because I have heard enough of them now to recognize the shape, where the thing that has been building quietly for years finally finds its trigger. Not its cause. The cause is always much older, much deeper, much more tangled than any single event can contain. The cause in my case was 30 years of being the photograph that didn't quite make it into the frame. But the trigger. The specific, datable, undeniable moment where something inside you crosses a line it cannot uncross. For me there were 2 of them. They happened within 6 months of each other. And together they made November inevitable. The first happened in May. I had been doing the freelance design work for about a year by this point. Quietly, carefully, still telling no one in my family. I had a small but growing roster of clients. Nothing that would impress anyone at a dinner table. A bakery, a yoga instructor, a woman who sold handmade candles online and needed a rebrand. The money was supplemental, not substantial. But the work was mine in a way I hadn't felt about anything in a very long time, and I was getting better at it, and getting better at something you chose for yourself, with no one watching and no approval to chase, is a specific kind of nourishment that I hadn't known I was starving for. In May, I landed what felt at the time like a significant project. A small architecture firm downtown needed a complete visual identity overhaul. New logo, brand guidelines, stationery, website templates. It was the largest project I'd taken on. The budget was real. The creative brief was genuinely interesting. And the lead architect, a woman named Diane who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke with the brisk precision of someone who had spent decades making decisions, looked at my portfolio and said something that I carried around with me for weeks afterward. You have a very mature visual instinct. This feels like the work of someone who's been doing this for 20 years. I had been doing it formally for one. I went home that evening and sat at my kitchen table and allowed myself, carefully and with some effort, to feel proud. It was an unfamiliar sensation. Not the reflexive, apologetic pleasure of being told I'd been helpful. Something cleaner. Something that belonged entirely to me. I wanted to tell someone. This is the thing nobody talks about when they describe the experience of growing up in a family where your achievements are minimized. The way it eventually colonizes your ability to celebrate yourself even in private. I had good news. Real good news, the kind that warranted a phone call, a dinner, a moment of shared joy. And I sat at that kitchen table cycling through the list of people I could tell and arriving, one by one, at the same conclusion for each of them. My father would nod and ask if it paid well. My mother would say that was nice and then redirect the conversation to something Nathan was doing. Nathan himself was not malicious, but he would not understand why this mattered, and his not understanding would cost me something I wasn't prepared to spend. I called my friend Simone instead. She screamed into the phone with an enthusiasm so outsized and genuine that I laughed until my eyes watered. We went for drinks that Friday to celebrate. She made the bartender announce it to the bar. 2 strangers raised their glasses in my direction. It was a wonderful evening. And it was shadowed the whole time by the awareness of the family-shaped hole where that joy should also have been able to live. I filed it. But this time the filing felt different. Fuller. Like a drawer that has been overstuffed for years and is finally struggling to close. 6 weeks after the architecture firm project, I was at my parents' house for a Sunday dinner. Nathan and Karen were there. The boys were there. My mother had made a roast, which meant the house smelled the way it always smelled on Sundays. Warm and familiar and deceptive in the way that the smells of childhood always are, carrying comfort on the surface and complexity underneath. We were at the table when Nathan mentioned casually between bites that he'd been promoted. I want to be clear, I was happy for him. Genuinely. Nathan worked hard and the promotion was deserved, and I have never been the kind of person who begrudges other people their good fortune, least of all my brother, who I loved even when the shape of our family made loving him complicated. But what happened next is what I need you to understand. My father put down his fork. He looked at Nathan with an expression I had been trying to earn my entire life. Open, warm, fully present. The particular light that comes into a person's face when they are genuinely, uncomplicated proud. He said, "Nathan, that is fantastic. Tell me everything." And Nathan told him everything. The new title, the expanded responsibilities, the salary adjustment. My father asked questions. Real questions, curious and engaged and interested, the kind of questions that say, "I see you, I want to understand, your life matters to me in its details." My mother reached across and squeezed Nathan's hand. Karen beamed. The boys didn't understand what was happening but picked up the celebratory energy and became briefly, infectiously delighted. It was a beautiful moment. I watched it from across the table and felt something I am not proud of feeling. Not jealousy exactly, because jealousy wants to take what someone else has, and I didn't want to take anything from Nathan. It was something more precise than jealousy. Something closer to grief wearing jealousy's clothing. I thought about the architecture firm. About Diane's words. About the work I had done that was the best work of my life so far, and that I had celebrated with a friend at a bar because there was no seat at this table for that kind of news. And then, and this is the moment, the first trigger, the thing I returned to, my mother turned to me. She turned to me and she smiled the managing smile and she said, "Alla, you've been quiet. How's work? How's work? Not tell me about a project you're proud of. Not what are you building right now. Not even are you happy? How's work?" The question you ask someone whose life you are monitoring for problems rather than paying attention to because it interests you. I said, "Work is good." She nodded and turned back to Nathan. The drawer closed. Or tried to. It wouldn't quite shut anymore. The second trigger came 3 months later. August. My mother called on a Wednesday evening. Unusual, she typically reserved calls for Sunday mornings, and I could tell from the first syllable that she was in what I privately called her logistics mode. Brisk, organized, already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. She told me that she and my father were planning a significant renovation of the house. They were going to redo the kitchen and the main bathroom, update the flooring throughout the ground floor. It would take approximately 6 weeks. During that time they needed somewhere to stay. They were going to stay with Nathan and Karen. This was not, on its face, surprising. Nathan had more space. 2 spare rooms, a guest bathroom, a finished basement. It made practical sense. What came next is what I need you to hear. "We'll be at Nathan's for the first 4 weeks," my mother said. "But the last 2 weeks, Karen's sister is visiting from Portland. So we'll need to stay somewhere else for those 2 weeks. We were thinking your place." "I have a 1-bedroom apartment." I said, "Mom, I only have 1 bedroom." She said, "I know. We take the bedroom. You can sleep on the sofa, it's only 2 weeks." I want to sit with that for a moment because I think it's easy to read that exchange quickly and miss what it contains. My parents' plan, stated plainly, was to displace me from my own bed in my own home for 2 weeks because their preferred option, staying with Nathan, had become temporarily inconvenient. There was no question in her voice. "No, would you be comfortable with that, or is that something you'd be able to manage?" It was logistical. It was assumed. It was the same operating principle that had governed my entire life in that family. That my comfort, my space, my needs were the adjustable variable. The thing you recalculate when the primary plan runs into an obstacle. I said I would think about it. My mother said, "What's there to think about? It's family." I said I would call her back. I hung up the phone and I sat in my 1-bedroom apartment and I looked at my sofa. A perfectly nice sofa. A sofa I had chosen and paid for and that I sometimes fell asleep on during thunderstorms because I found the sound of rain on my window peaceful. And I thought about sleeping on it for 2 weeks while my parents occupied my bed, my space, my home. And I thought about the Sunday dinner. About housework. About Nathan's promotion and my father's face and the architecture firm project and Simone screaming into the phone. And I thought about every filed moment, every closed drawer, every adjustment I had made to make myself fit into a family that had never actually made room for me. I called my mother back 20 minutes later. I told her it wasn't going to work for me. The silence on the other end was the kind that has texture. Dense and cold and disbelieving. "Excuse me." I said, "I don't have the space, Mom. I'm sorry. Ella, it's 2 weeks. We're your parents. I know. But I'm not comfortable giving up my bedroom for 2 weeks. I hope you can understand that." Another silence. Longer this time. "I don't know what's gotten into you," she said finally. "You've been very selfish lately." She hung up. Selfish. The word landed the way those words always land when they come from the people who taught you that your needs were inconvenient. Not like an insult exactly, but like a diagnosis. Like they'd identified something in you that you should be ashamed of. I had been called selfish for declining to give up my own bed. I sat with that for a long time. And something that had been loosening for months finally came free. The weeks between that phone call and November were quiet in the way that things are quiet before they break completely. My parents found a short-term rental for the last 2 weeks of the renovation. My mother did not call me during this period except once, briefly, to relay logistical information about a family obligation she expected me to attend. She was civil in the way that people are civil when they are also punishing you, each exchange stripped of warmth, conducted at the temperature of a business transaction. My father did not call at all. I went to the family obligation. I showed up on time. I helped with things. I was, to all outward appearances, the same Ella I had always been. Present, functional, helpful, unremarkable. But I was not the same. I had said no. Once about something small, about a sofa in a bedroom and 2 weeks of my own space. And the response had been silence and the word selfish and a withdrawal of warmth so swift and complete that it told me everything I needed to know about the terms of my membership in this family. The terms were total compliance. The terms were infinite accommodation. The terms were that my needs did not enter the calculation. And if I ever made the mistake of suggesting that they might, the warmth would be withdrawn until I corrected myself. I had spent 28 years correcting myself. I was very tired of it. I didn't know yet that they were going to change the locks. I didn't know that November was coming, that a note in 9 words was already being composed somewhere in my mother's precise and managing mind. I didn't know that the duffel bag in the gas station and the $47 were waiting for me. But I knew something was ending. I could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Not the storm itself, not yet. Just the air becoming something different. The sky taking on that particular quality of light that means everything is about to shift. I went to family dinners. I helped with things. I smiled the smile I had learned to wear. And underneath it, very quietly, I started letting go. Not in anger. Not with a plan. Just the slow, necessary release of someone who has finally understood that she has been holding on to something that was never actually holding her back. I let go of the hope that my father would one day look at me the way he looked at Nathan across that dinner table. I let go of the version of my mother that existed only in the moments when she needed something from me. I let go of the idea that if I was just helpful enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough, the warmth would eventually become consistent. I let go of all of it. And I held on very tightly to the only thing that had ever been entirely mine. The work. The clients. The growing, quiet, stubborn proof that I was capable of building something, that I was, in fact, already building it one project at a time, in the evenings at my kitchen table while my family went about their lives entirely unaware. November came. The locks were changed. And I drove to that gas station with $47 and a lavender-scented duffel bag. And I was ready. I need to tell you about the first night. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. There was no montage moment, no triumphant music, no sudden clarity that arrives conveniently in the first act of a story about rebuilding. The first night was just a woman in a gas station parking lot in the rain, running the numbers on her phone calculator for the 4th time as if the answer might change, and arriving at the same conclusion each time. $47. One duffel bag. No plan. I called Simone at 11:30. She picked up on the second ring. This is the thing about Simone, she has always picked up, and I told her what had happened in the flattest, most factual voice I could manage, because if I used any other voice I was going to fall apart in a gas station parking lot, and I had decided, somewhere between reading that note and starting my car, that I was not going to do that. Simone said, "You're coming here. Don't argue with me." I argued with her for 4 minutes. She won. I slept on her couch for 6 weeks. Her apartment was a 1-bedroom in a part of the city that was aggressively loud on weekends. Bass from the bar downstairs, voices in the stairwell, the particular urban percussion of a building that housed mostly people in their late 20s who kept different hours than I did. I didn't mind. The noise was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Simone charged me nothing for those 6 weeks. I contributed to groceries and I cooked dinner 4 nights a week, and I kept the shared spaces clean with a thoroughness that she eventually told me was starting to unsettle her. "Ella, you've reorganized my spice rack twice. I think you might be stress cleaning." She wasn't wrong. But I was also, underneath the stress cleaning and the couch sleeping and the calculator running, doing something else. I was working. This is the part of the story that people sometimes want to compress into a montage. The rebuilding. The grind. The quiet, unglamorous, deeply unsexy middle section where nothing dramatic happens and everything important does. I am going to resist the compression. Because the grind is the story. The grind is where I actually became someone different. And I think it deserves to be told in its full, unhurried, uncinematic truth. The morning after I arrived at Simone's, the first morning, I woke up at 6 on her couch with a stiff neck and the immediate flooding recall of everything that had happened the night before. I lay there for approximately 4 minutes, allowing myself to feel the full weight of it. The locked door. The note. The $47. The family that had decided cleanly and without apparent difficulty that I was a problem they were finished managing. 4 minutes. That was all I allowed. Then I got up, made coffee, opened my laptop and sent 3 emails. The first was to Diane at the architecture firm, thanking her for the project, asking if she knew anyone who might be looking for design work. The second was to a woman named Priya whose candle business I'd rebranded, asking if she'd be willing to write me a testimonial for a portfolio website I was planning to build. The third was to a small business networking group I'd seen advertised online but never joined because I'd told myself I wasn't ready, that I needed more experience first, that I should wait until I was more established. I had been waiting my entire life to be enough before I started. I was done waiting. I joined the networking group that morning. I built the portfolio website over the following 2 weeks, working on Simone's kitchen table after she left for work, learning what I didn't know by looking it up, figuring things out in the methodical, unglamorous way that you figure things out when you can't afford to pay someone else to do it for you. I got my first referral from the networking group within 3 weeks. A small HR consultancy needed a pitch deck redesigned for a client presentation. The budget was modest. The timeline was tight. I delivered it 2 days early and it was genuinely excellent work. The consultant referred me to 2 more clients before the month was out. By the time I left Simone's couch and moved into my own place, a studio apartment small enough that I could touch both walls in the kitchen if I stretched my arms out, in a building that smelled faintly of old carpet and somebody else's cooking, the freelance work had grown from a supplement into something that was beginning, cautiously and with considerable effort, to look like a business. I want to be honest about the timeline because I think stories like mine sometimes do a disservice by implying that the turn happened quickly. It didn't. The first year was very hard. There were months where the income was inconsistent in ways that required careful, unglamorous management. Moving money around, making choices about what to spend and what to defer, eating a lot of pasta not because I was romanticizing poverty but because pasta was cheap and I needed to keep the lights on. I did not call my parents. They did not call me. The silence was, at first, the hardest part. Not because I missed them in a simple way. It was more complicated than missing, more textured, carrying within it both grief and relief in proportions that shifted depending on the day. Some mornings I woke up and the absence felt like freedom. Other mornings it felt like an amputation. Most mornings it felt like both simultaneously, which is perhaps the most accurate way to describe the experience of leaving a family that hurt you. The freedom and the loss are not sequential, they are concurrent, they live in the same space and you carry them both at once and you keep going anyway. Kept going. The business grew the way real things grow. Not in dramatic leaps but in the steady, compounding accumulation of small decisions made consistently over time. I got better at the work. This sounds obvious but it is worth saying plainly because I think we sometimes skip over the part where someone simply becomes more skilled through the act of showing up every day and doing the thing and paying attention to what works and what doesn't and being willing to be wrong and correcting and trying again. I got better at design. I got better at client communication. I got better at pricing my work. An education in itself. Learning that I had been undercharging not because my instincts were wrong but because I had been trained my entire life to make myself easier to accept. And undercharging was just that same instinct in a business context. I raised my rates. Twice in the first 2 years. I lost 1 client over it. Every other client stayed. 2 of them told me it was about time. In the second year I started subcontracting, small projects, bringing in a copywriter I'd met through the networking group, a web developer who worked remotely and communicated entirely in very efficient 3-sentence emails. The work became more layered, more interesting. I was no longer just a person who made things look good. I was someone who could walk a client through a complete brand identity from the strategic foundation to the finished visual system. That was a different kind of offering. It commanded different attention. It commanded different fees. In the third year, something shifted that I hadn't anticipated. I had been living in the studio apartment for 2 years. I had been saving, carefully, deliberately, with the same methodical attention I brought to everything, a spreadsheet that I updated every Sunday morning with a consistency that Simone, who had seen it, described as both impressive and slightly concerning. I had a number in mind. A number that felt, when I'd first written it down, like fantasy. Stopped feeling like fantasy. I started looking at properties. Not with urgency. Not with the frantic energy of someone trying to prove something. With the quiet, deliberate attention of someone who has learned, through considerable difficulty, to trust her own judgment. I looked at neighborhoods. I looked at market trends. I attended open houses on Saturday mornings, walking through rooms that belonged to other people, imagining what it would feel like to have a door with a lock that only I controlled. That last part, the lock, was not incidental. I found the house in the early spring of the 4th year after the night on the porch. It was not a grand house. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood that was on the careful early edge of becoming something. The kind of street where half the houses were immaculate and half were projects in waiting, where young families were beginning to appear on weekend mornings with strollers and coffee cups. The house needed work. The kitchen was dated. The bathroom fixtures were an aggressive shade of beige that had clearly once been considered neutral. I loved it immediately. The inspection turned up nothing structural. The negotiation was brisk and went in my favor. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon in an office that smelled like printer toner and old wood, and when the notary pushed the deed across the table for my final signature, I looked at my name on that document for a long moment before I picked up the pen. Ella Mercer. My name. On a deed. For a house with a lock that I would control. I signed it. I drove to the house afterward. My house, a sentence that my brain kept stumbling over with a kind of delighted disbelief. And I sat in the car in the driveway for a while, not going in, just sitting. Looking at the front door. The porch steps. The window boxes that the previous owners had left behind, still holding the dried remnants of last summer's flowers. I thought about another porch. Another front door. A note in 9 words and a key that wouldn't turn, and rain coming down on a duffel bag that smelled like lavender. I thought about $47. I thought about the couch and the spice rack and Simone winning the argument in 4 minutes and the networking emails at 6 in the morning and the pasta and the spreadsheet and the raised rates and the subcontractors and the clients who told me it was about time. I thought about all of it, the whole long, quiet, unglamorous grind of it, and I let myself feel what it had produced. Not triumph. That's not quite the right word. Something more durable than triumph. Something that feels from the inside remarkably like peace. I got out of the car. I walked up the porch steps. I put my key in the lock. Turned. For 4 years the silence held. Not a dramatic silence. Not the charged, electric quiet of 2 parties circling each other waiting for someone to make a move. Just the ordinary, settling silence of people who have stopped being part of each other's daily lives. The kind of silence that accumulates gradually, the way dust does, until one day you notice how much of it there is and realize it's been building for longer than you thought. I did not reach out to my parents. They did not reach out to me. There were moments early on where I expected it, where I half anticipated a call, a letter, some form of contact that would open the door to whatever conversation needed to happen. The first Christmas was strange. I spent it with Simone's family, who received me with the easy, inclusive warmth of people who simply assumed that anyone Simone loved was worth making space for. Her mother put a plate in front of me without asking. Her father argued cheerfully with me about a film we'd both seen. Her younger brother fell asleep on the couch after dinner, and nobody thought this required comment. It was the most normal Christmas I had ever had. I cried in Simone's car on the way home. Not from sadness exactly. From the particular ache of being shown at 30 years old what it was supposed to feel like all along. The second Christmas was easier. The third easier still. By the fourth I had built enough of a life that the absence of my family of origin had been filled. Not replaced, because that's not how it works, but filled, with people and work and purpose and the quiet daily satisfaction of a life that was entirely, accountably mine. I had friends who knew my real story. I had clients who trusted my judgment. I had a house with window boxes that I had replanted in the spring with lavender, deliberately, defiantly, reclaiming the smell from the duffel bag and returning it to something that belonged to me on my own terms. I had, in every meaningful sense, moved on. And then my brother called. It was a Thursday evening in October. I was at my kitchen table. My kitchen table in my house, a fact that still carried a small charge of quiet satisfaction even 4 years in, working on a brand identity project for a hospitality client. My phone lit up with Nathan's name. I looked at it for a moment. We had not spoken in over a year. Not from hostility. There had never been hostility between Nathan and me, only the slow drift of two people whose lives had stopped overlapping. He existed in the family ecosystem from which I had departed. I existed outside it. There was no map for how to maintain the relationship across that divide, and neither of us had drawn one. I answered, "Ella." His voice was careful. The voice of someone who has rehearsed an opening. "Nathan." Pause. "How are you?" "I'm well." "You?" "Good." "Yeah, good." Another pause. Longer. "Listen, I'm calling because Mom asked me to." There it was. I set down my pen. "Okay." She wanted me to. She thought it might be easier if I reached out first. To sort of, I don't know, break the ice. I said nothing. I had learned over years of difficult conversations with people who wanted me to fill silences on their behalf, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait. Nathan filled it. "They want to see you, Ella. Mom and Dad. It's been a long time and I think they want to try to repair things." Repair things. The phrase landed with the particular weight of language chosen carefully to distribute responsibility evenly across a situation that was not, in fact, evenly distributed. I said, "That's interesting. What's changed?" Pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, 4 years ago they changed the locks on the house I grew up in and left me a note. I've heard nothing since. So I'm asking what's changed. What's prompting this now?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think they miss you." "Hey," I said. "Tell them I appreciate that. I'll think about it." "Ella." "I'll think about it, Nathan." That's an honest answer. We said goodbye. I set the phone down and sat very still for a moment, feeling the careful architecture of the life I'd built around me. The house, the work, the chosen family, the hard-won peace. And I checked it the way you check a structure after a tremor. Testing for cracks. Finding none. I was okay. But I knew, with the resigned certainty of someone who has grown up in a particular kind of family, that this was not the end of the contact. It was the beginning of it. My mother called herself 2 weeks later. I had been expecting it. Not the timing, not specifically, but the call itself. Because Nathan's reaching out had the quality of an advance party, a scouted approach. My mother was too strategic to open with herself. She would send Nathan first, gauge the response, calibrate her approach accordingly. She called on a Sunday morning. Old habit, I supposed. Sunday mornings had always been her preferred time for calls she considered important. Her voice, when I answered, was the voice I remembered from my childhood. Warm, measured, carrying beneath its surface warmth the faint structural hum of a person who always knows where a conversation is going before it starts. "Ella." "It's Mom." "I know, Mom. How are you? You sound well." "I am well." "Good." A brief pause. "I've been thinking about you." I waited. I know there's been a lot of distance between us. And I know some of that is, I know it hasn't been easy. Pause. Careful. "I'd like to see you. Your father would too. I thought maybe we could have lunch. Nothing big. Just the 3 of us." I thought about it for 3 seconds, which is about how long it took me to decide that I was curious enough about what she actually wanted to say yes, and grounded enough in my own life that saying yes didn't feel like a risk. "Sure," I said. "Lunch is fine." We met at a restaurant my mother chose. A quiet Italian place in the suburb where I'd grown up. The kind of establishment that had been there for 30 years and catered to a clientele that valued consistency over excitement. White tablecloths. Bread brought to the table automatically. A wine list that nobody ever really looked at. My parents were already seated when I arrived. I want to describe this moment carefully, because it was stranger than I'd anticipated. I had spent 4 years building a life in which my parents occupied no physical space. They existed in memory, in the archived emotional weight of 30 years of family, but not in rooms, not in chairs across tables from me. Seeing them in person again was a form of dimensional shift. They were smaller than they existed in my mind. My father's hair was fully gray in a way it hadn't been 4 years ago. My mother had new glasses, round frames that softened her face slightly. They looked for the first time I could remember like they might be uncertain. My father stood when I approached. He hugged me, briefly, the slightly stiff hug of a man who has never been entirely comfortable with physical affection, and said "You look good, Ella." My mother hugged me longer. I let her. We sat. We ordered. We made the preliminary small talk of people who are all waiting for the conversation to become what it actually is. It took until the main course. My mother set down her fork. She looked at me in the direct way she has when she's decided that the approach she's been managing is taking too long. "We made a mistake," she said. With the house. With the way things ended. I want you to know that. I looked at her. I waited. Things were very stressful at the time with the renovation in your father's back, and I think we handled it very badly. And I'm sorry for that. I noticed several things about this apology simultaneously. It's passive construction. Things were stressful, it was handled badly, which distributed agency so thinly it almost disappeared. The specific frame of the renovation and my father's back. As if the locked door had been a logistical error rather than the culmination of 30 years of a particular dynamic. The word badly rather than wrongly. But I also noticed that she had said it. That she was sitting across a white tablecloth in a quiet Italian restaurant, and she had said the words "we made a mistake and I'm sorry," which were words I had waited a very long time to hear. I said, "I appreciate you saying that." My father cleared his throat. "We've missed you," he said. "Both of us." The conversation continued from there. Cautious, measured, navigating around the deeper architecture of what had happened with the careful avoidance of people who want reconciliation without excavation. I didn't push. It wasn't the moment to push. I was curious, I was open, and I was watching. Because something underneath the apology and the "missing you" and the "we handled it badly" didn't quite add up. Something had prompted this. Not just time, not just missing me. Something specific. I didn't find out what it was that afternoon. I found out 6 weeks later. The second lunch was my mother's suggestion again. Same restaurant, same white tablecloths. This time Nathan and Karen came too, which changed the energy in ways I catalogued quietly. Nathan's presence made my father more relaxed. Karen's presence made my mother perform warmth at a slightly higher register. We were on dessert when my mother brought it up. She did it the way she had always done difficult things. Directly, without preamble, in the tone of someone presenting a reasonable proposal to a reasonable audience. "We've been talking," she said, "about the future. About practical matters. Your father's back has been more limiting this year, and the house requires more upkeep than we can really manage comfortably on our own." I listened. "We've been looking at options. And we feel that the most sensible arrangement, the one that makes the most sense for the family, would be for us to sell the house and move somewhere more manageable." "That sounds reasonable," I said carefully. My mother looked at me with the expression of someone arriving at the point they've been building toward. "We were hoping," she said, "that we might be able to move in with you." The table was quiet for a moment. "You have the space," Nathan added, with the careful helpfulness of someone who has been briefed on his role in this conversation. 3 bedrooms. It would be temporary, just while they figure out the next step. Temporary. The word my family had always used to describe arrangements that were anything but. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at Nathan, who was watching me with the expression of someone who genuinely believed this was a reasonable request and had not allowed himself to trace the particular irony embedded in it. My parents, who had changed the locks, who had left a note in 9 words, who had spent 30 years treating my home, my time, my space, my needs as the adjustable variable in every family equation. Now sitting across a white tablecloth in a quiet Italian restaurant asking if they could move into my house. Permanently. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. I set it down carefully. And I looked at my mother and said in the most even voice I possessed, "That's a big ask." Her eyes didn't waver. "Your family," she said. "We take care of each other. We take care of each other." I had waited 38 years to hear my mother say those words and mean them in a direction that included me. I thought about the note on the door. The 9 words. The rain. The $47 and the lavender and the gas station and the 6 weeks on Simone's couch and the pasta and the spreadsheet and the networking emails and the raised rates and the deed on the table with my name on it and the key that turned. I thought about all of it. And I said, "Let me think about it." My mother nodded, satisfied in the way she always nodded when she assumed that thinking about it was a formality. She did not know what I was actually thinking. She did not know what I had built. She did not know, because I had never told her, because there had been no one to tell, because I had built all of it in the quiet and the silence and the grinding private accumulation of 4 years of work, that I had spent the last 4 years becoming someone she had not yet met. He was about to. I did not call my mother back the next day. I did not call her the day after that either. I took 10 days. Not out of cruelty, I want to be clear about that, because what I did in those 10 days was not the silent treatment, was not a power play, was not the calculated withholding of someone enjoying leverage for its own sake. It was something more necessary than any of that. It was thinking. Real thinking. The kind that requires space and honesty and a willingness to sit with uncomfortable questions until they produce answers you can actually trust. I walked through my house in the evenings after work and I asked myself the hard things. What did I actually want? What did reconciliation mean to me, and what was I willing to offer? And where were the lines I needed to hold, not out of bitterness but out of self-respect? What did I owe these people, and what did I owe myself, and how did I tell the difference between forgiveness and erasure? Because that is the question nobody tells you about when you're navigating estrangement from a difficult family. Everyone has an opinion about whether you should reconcile. Nobody talks about the terms. I was done being the person who accepted whatever terms were handed to her. So I thought. I walked through my house. I sat on my porch in the October evenings with a cup of tea and watched the street and let the questions work through me until the answers settled. And then I called my mother back. Ella. She picked up on the first ring. She had been waiting. Of course she had. Mom. I've been thinking about what you asked. Good. A pause, and in that pause I could hear the particular quality of her attention. Focused, anticipatory, already composing her response to what she assumed I was going to say. And I'd like to meet. Just you and Dad. Not a restaurant this time. I'd like you to come to my house. A brief silence. I think the invitation surprised her. The house was territory she hadn't seen, hadn't entered, hadn't been able to map. I think she'd been expecting another white tablecloth negotiation on neutral ground. Of course, she said. When? Saturday. We'll be there. They arrived at 11 in the morning. I had not done anything theatrical to prepare. I had not arranged the house to impress or to signal or to perform. I had simply cleaned it the way I always cleaned it, carefully because I take care of things that are mine, and I had made coffee and put out a simple tray of things, and I had sat in the living room and breathed for a few minutes before the doorbell rang. I opened the door. My parents stood on my porch. My father in his good weekend jacket, the navy one he'd worn to church for 20 years. My mother in a pressed blouse, her handbag held in both hands in front of her, a posture I recognized as her version of uncertain. "Come in," I said. They came in. I watched them take in the house. I had not told them anything about it. Not when I bought it, not in the 2 lunches we'd shared, not in the careful surface-skimming conversations we'd had in the weeks since the Italian restaurant. As far as my parents knew, I was still the Ella who had driven a 10-year-old Honda and parked it on the street while my sister's Lexus got the driveway. The Ella who did part-time accounting work. The Ella who helped out. They did not know about the years. The clients. The referrals. The raised rates. The networking group, the subcontractors, the hospitality brands and the architecture firms, and the growing, compounding evidence that I had spent 4 years building something real and significant and entirely without their knowledge or approval. They did not know that the house they were standing in, the house with the good bones and the craftsman details and the replanted window boxes and the clean, considered interior of someone who had learned, through considerable effort, to trust her own taste, was mine outright. Paid for. My name on the deed. My mother moved through the living room slowly. Her eyes went to the built-in bookshelves I'd had refinished, the architectural prints on the wall, the quality of the light through the front windows. Her expression was doing something complicated, recalibrating, I thought. Revising. "This is lovely, Ella," she said finally. "Thank you." My father nodded, looking around with the quiet assessment of a man who understands property. "Good bones," he said. "Craftsman." 1928, I said. "Original hardwood under the rugs. I had the bookshelves and the window trim refinished last spring." Something moved across his face. I couldn't name it precisely. Something between surprise and something else. Something that might, in a different man, have looked like the beginning of recognition. We sat. I poured coffee. And then I did the thing I had spent 10 days preparing to do. I told them the truth. Not as an attack. I want to be precise about this because it matters. What I did that Saturday morning was not a confrontation in the way that word implies. The raised voices, the recriminations, the years of grievances delivered as artillery. I had seen what that looked like and I had no interest in it. It produces heat but rarely light. It feels in the moment like release and then it feels afterward like a different kind of damage. What I did was quieter and, I think, harder. I simply told them the truth about what their family had produced. I told them about the photo album, the Christmas mornings and the baseball tournaments and the graduation party with the banner and the congratulations toast and the $50 in a card. I told them about Derek's taxes and the apron that said "World's Best Aunt" and the sofa I was expected to vacate for 2 weeks. I told them about the Sunday dinner where I'd wanted to share the architecture firm project and instead been asked how's work in the tone you use for monitoring, not caring. I told them about the note. I told them about the $47. I told them about Simone's couch and the pasta and the spreadsheet and the networking emails at 6 in the morning and what it had felt like to build something entirely alone because there was no seat at the family table for the kind of news I was generating. I told them all of it. Calmly. Specifically. In the even, clear voice of someone who has done the work and no longer needs the other person to validate her experience in order to know it was real. My mother was very still through most of it. My father looked at his coffee cup. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then my mother said quietly, "I didn't know you felt that way." And here is the moment. The one I had been, without fully realizing it, preparing for since I was 7 years old, watching my father read an instruction manual while I held up a doll. I said, "I know you didn't. That's part of what I needed to tell you. We love you, Ella." "I know that too," I said. "I believe it. And I also know that love without attention produces the same damage as not enough love. I needed you to know what it felt like from the inside." My father looked up from his coffee cup. His face was doing the thing it did when he was trying to hold something together. The jaw set, the eyes careful. He was a man who had spent his entire life being emotionally unavailable and knowing it and not knowing what to do about it. And I think in that moment he was confronting that with more directness than he'd ever been asked to before. He said, "I'm sorry, Ella." 2 words. Plain. Undecorated. From my father they were extraordinary. I nodded. Thank you. Then I told them about the business. This was the part they hadn't seen coming. I watched their faces as I laid it out. Not boastfully, not with the triumphant energy of someone proving a point, but with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone reporting accurately on their own life. The freelance work that had grown into a full creative agency. The client roster that now included regional hospitality brands, a national retail chain's seasonal campaigns, 3 architecture firms, and a tech startup whose rebrand had been featured in an industry publication the previous spring. I told them about the revenue. Plainly, specifically, because vagueness would have allowed them to fill in their own numbers and I wanted no ambiguity. My mother's expression had moved through several phases by this point. The recalibration from earlier, when she'd taken in the house, had deepened into something more significant. She was revising not just her assessment of my circumstances but her entire map of who I was and what I had been doing while she hadn't been paying attention. You built all of this, she said slowly. In 4 years. In 4 years, I confirmed. On your own. Yes. She looked around the living room again. The bookshelves. The prints. The house that her daughter had purchased outright with money earned from work that no one in the family had known was happening. I watched her understand something that I think she had never in 38 years of being my mother truly reckoned with. That I was capable. Profoundly, independently, demonstrably capable. Not in spite of leaving. Because of it. About moving in, my mother began. I want to talk about that, I said. That's why I asked you here. She nodded. My father put down his coffee cup and gave me the attention I had spent a lifetime trying to earn across dinner tables and Christmas mornings and Sunday afternoons in the kitchen. I had it now. I didn't waste it. I've thought carefully about what you asked, I said. And I want to respond honestly, the way I should have been able to be honest with you for years. They waited. I'm not going to say no outright. But I am going to say that the answer depends entirely on whether the dynamic changes. Not cosmetically. Not an apology at a restaurant and then a return to the same patterns. Actually changes. My mother's chin lifted slightly. What does that mean practically? It means that if you live in my house, you live in my house. Not the other way around. It means that my work is treated with the same respect you gave Nathan's career. It means that decisions that affect me are made with me, not around me. It means that I am seen as a full member of this family, not the helpful one, not the easy one, not the one whose needs are the adjustable variable. The room was very quiet. It means, I continued, that we do this differently. Completely differently. Or we don't do it at all. And I want you to know that both of those outcomes are ones I can live with. I am not negotiating from need. I am negotiating from choice. My father looked at me for a long time. Then he did something I had not seen him do in 38 years of being his daughter. He nodded slowly with his full attention and said, "That's fair, Ella. That's completely fair." My mother was quiet for a moment longer. The managing expression, the logistics face, the organized general composure. All of it had softened into something more unguarded than I was used to seeing from her. "I hear you," she said finally. "Not I understand, which can be a deflection. Not of course, which can be a dismissal wearing agreement's clothing. I hear you." 3 words. And from my mother, in that particular tone, in that particular moment, they were the most honest thing she had said to me in as long as I could remember. I looked at my parents. 2 people who had made profound, consequential mistakes in how they loved me, and who were sitting in the home their daughter had built without them, finally listening. I thought about the 7-year-old with the doll. The 16-year-old watching the graduation party from the edge of the yard. The 28-year-old on the porch in the rain. I thought about what she would want me to do. Not the dramatic thing. Not the closed door returned in kind, the revenge of the final refusal. Something more complicated and more human than that. He would want to be seen. Finally, genuinely, fully seen. And for the first time in 38 years, sitting in the living room of a house that bore her name on its deed, she was. "I need to tell you how it ended." Not the ending you might have written for this story if you'd been holding the pen from the beginning. Not the clean, cinematic resolution where the wronged party delivers a devastating final speech and walks away in slow motion while the antagonists crumble. Not the other version either. The unconditional reconciliation, the tearful embrace. The family restored to wholeness as if the years of damage were a misunderstanding that a single honest conversation could fully dissolve. The real ending is messier than either of those. More human. More true. And I think it's more useful, which is why I'm going to tell it to you exactly as it happened. My parents did not move in with me. I want to say that clearly because I think after everything I've told you, you deserve to know the outcome without suspense. They asked. I considered it honestly and carefully and without the reflexive people-pleasing that had governed every significant decision of my adult life before November on that porch. And in the end I said no. Not because I wanted to punish them. Not because the conversation in my living room hadn't meant anything. It had meant a great deal more than I can fully articulate, and I believe my parents' remorse was genuine in the way that remorse can be genuine and still insufficient. Not because I had stopped loving them, because I hadn't. Love, I have learned, is one of the things that persists even when it probably shouldn't, even when you've spent years carefully building a life that doesn't require it to function. I said no because I had finally, at 38 years old, learned to distinguish between what I was capable of giving and what was actually mine to give. I was capable of having my parents in my house. I had the space, the means, the logistical capacity. Capability was never the question. What I did not have, what I was not willing to manufacture, was the certainty that the dynamic would hold. That the patterns of 30 years would not reassert themselves under the pressure of daily proximity. That I would not wake up 6 months into the arrangement and find myself back in the kitchen at midnight, helping out, adjusting, making myself smaller to accommodate the same architecture that had produced the locked door and the 9-word note in the first place. I know myself well enough now to know that the version of me who would have said yes to protect everyone else's feelings was the version I had spent 4 years becoming free of. I was not going back to her. So I said no. Gently. Specifically. With the full explanation they deserved rather than the polite deflection I would have offered once. I told them I wanted a relationship with them. A real one, rebuilt on honest terms, with enough time and enough evidence and enough accumulated new experience to establish that things were genuinely different. I told them I wanted Sunday phone calls and occasional dinners and the slow, patient reconstruction of something that might eventually deserve to be called a family. But not cohabitation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And I was no longer willing to pretend that maybe not ever was a failure. My mother was quiet for a long time after I said it. Then she said, I understand. And I believe she did. Not completely. I don't think complete understanding of what she'd built and what it had cost me was something she could arrive at in a single conversation or perhaps in a lifetime. But something. Enough to sit with rather than argue against. My father said nothing for a moment. Then he reached across and put his hand briefly over mine on the table. The gesture of a man who has never found words easy, offering the most he knows how to offer. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than I had expected. And I have learned to hold that, the gap between what you needed and what arrived, not as a deficit but as information. As the honest measure of what is actually available, which is always more useful than the imagined measure of what should have been. They found a condominium 20 minutes away. Single floor, manageable. A small garden in the back that my mother immediately began organizing with the same focused energy she'd once directed at church committees and neighborhood associations. My father hired someone for the heavy maintenance. He stopped pretending his back was fine. We have Sunday phone calls now. Most Sundays. Not all. There are still gaps, still the occasional dropped thread, still moments where the old patterns surface like objects rising in water, and we have to decide in real time whether to name them or navigate around them. Sometimes I name them. Sometimes I let them go. The decision is mine to make now, which is the part that matters most. We have dinner together about once a month. At a restaurant, usually neutral ground, equal footing, no one in the kitchen. My mother no longer assumes I will arrive early to help. My father asks questions about my work with an attention that is still sometimes effortful but is effort I can see him making, which is different from the Sunday dinners of my childhood, and I am choosing to treat it as different. Nathan and I have rebuilt something too. Slower, more careful. He called me a few weeks after the Saturday at my house and said, in the direct way that Nathan uses when he's decided something, "I think I missed a lot of things that were happening. I'm sorry for that." It wasn't the most comprehensive accounting of what had gone unnoticed, but it was sincere, and sincerity from Nathan has always been currency I valued precisely because he deploys it without performance. We get coffee sometimes. We talk about things that matter and things that don't, in the proportion that feels right for two people relearning how to be siblings without the distorting pressure of a family dynamic that assign them opposite roles. It's imperfect. Real. I'll take real over perfect every time. I want to talk to you directly for a moment. If you've been with me this whole time, through the 7-year-old with the doll and the porch in the rain and the gas station and the pasta and the spreadsheet and the deed with my name on it and the Saturday morning in my living room, I want to say something to you that I mean with complete sincerity. Your experience is real. Whatever version of this story lives in your own history, whether it's a locked door or a differently shaped exclusion, whether it's a family that loved you conditionally or a relationship that required you to be someone other than who you are, your experience of it is real and it is valid and it does not require anyone else's confirmation to be true. I spent 30 years doubting my own perception because the people responsible for shaping my understanding of reality had a vested interest in me doing so. I called myself too sensitive so many times that it stopped feeling like a criticism and started feeling like a fact. I filed away 1,000 small moments of being treated as less than because the alternative, trusting what I was seeing, required me to accept something too frightening to accept while I was still inside it. If that is where you are right now, inside it, filing things, adjusting, making yourself smaller and easier and less demanding and more accommodating, I want you to hear this. You are not too sensitive. You are paying attention. And paying attention to how you are being treated is not a character flaw. It is the beginning of everything. The beginning of everything for me was a note in 9 words and a duffel bag and $47 and the decision, made not heroically but desperately in a gas station parking lot in the rain, to stop waiting for the people who were supposed to see me to finally see me, and to start instead seeing myself. I built a business. I bought a house. I replanted the window boxes with lavender. I found people who loved me without conditions and I let them love me, which was harder than building the business and harder than buying the house and is still, honestly, ongoing work. I did not get the family I deserved as a child. That is simply true, and I have stopped spending energy on the grief of it because the grief, while real, is not a room I need to live in. What I got instead, what I built instead, in the silence and the grind and the years of quiet, unglamorous effort, is a life that is mine in every sense of the word. Not handed to me. Not conditional. Not revocable by someone else's decision to change the locks. And here is what I know now that I could not have known sitting on that porch 28 years old in the November rain. The locked door was not the end of my story. It was the first page. Some of you are going to leave this video and go back to a situation that feels impossible. A family that doesn't see you. A relationship where your needs are always the adjustable variable. A life where you have been so thoroughly trained to make yourself smaller that smallness has started to feel like your natural size. I want to leave you with the only thing I know to be true from the inside of that experience. You are not your family's understanding of you. You are not the role they assigned you. You are not the helpful one, the difficult one, the too sensitive one, the one who doesn't have anything important to do. You are not the person who parks on the street while someone else's car gets the driveway. You are not the photograph that didn't make it into the frame. You are a complete person. Full-sized. Worthy of the driveway, worthy of the frame, worthy of a door with a lock that you control. And the life that is actually yours, the one that belongs to you, not to the version of yourself that other people found convenient, is waiting on the other side of the decision to stop shrinking. I cannot tell you that decision is easy. I cannot promise you the timeline or the shape of what comes after. I cannot guarantee that the people who should have seen you will ever fully see you because some of them won't, and learning to grieve that without being destroyed by it is some of the hardest and most necessary work a person can do. What I can tell you is that $47 and a lavender-scented duffel bag and one decision made in a gas station parking lot at midnight in the rain was enough to start. It was enough for me. Can be enough for you. If this story reached you today, if something in it landed somewhere real, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because somewhere out there is a person sitting with a tight chest and a filing system full of small moments and a voice in their head that keeps telling them they're being too sensitive. And they need to know they're not. They're just paying attention. Leave me a comment. Tell me what part of this stayed with you. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your version if you're ready to. I read every single one, and I mean that, and your story matters whether you share it here or carry it quietly or speak it out loud one day when you're ready. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. And to the version of you that is still standing on the porch in the rain, key in hand trying to understand why the lock won't turn. Keep going. The life on the other side of this is yours. It's already waiting,